Arthur's family truth. My wife died on a Tuesday. By Friday, her sons were already sitting at my kitchen table with a folder full of legal papers and a very specific number in mind, and it wasn't the one Carol had planned for them. My name is Lawrence Caldwell. I'm 58 years old, retired commercial contractor, Sacramento, California. Carol and I were married for 19 years. She was smart, organized, and the most deliberate person I've ever known. Everything she did had a reason behind it. I understood that about her when she was alive. I understood it even better after she was gone. She died of pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the end. I was there for all of it, every appointment, every decision, every night that got harder than the one before. Her sons, Brendan Prescott, 34, and Owen Prescott, 31, were not. Brendan flew in from Chicago twice. Owen drove up from Fresno once, stayed 2 days and left because he had a deal closing. That was the extent of it, but they showed up for the funeral, and 3 days after we buried her, Brendan called. Not a text, a phone call, formal and practiced, like he'd rehearsed it. He said he and Owen needed to sit down and discuss practical matters regarding the estate. His words exactly. I remember because I was standing in Carol's kitchen holding a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, and those 8 words landed like a punch I didn't see coming. They came the next afternoon. Brendan wore a jacket even though it was warm. He set a manila folder on Carol's kitchen table, the same table where she used to spread out her client files on Sunday mornings, coffee in one hand, highlighter in the other, and he opened it like he was presenting a business proposal, because that's exactly what it was. The house, $720,000, goes to Brendan and Owen jointly. The cabin at Lake Tahoe, $480,000, same deal. Carol's realty consulting business, Pacific West Realty Advisors, whatever it was worth at this point, also theirs. And for me, after 19 years of marriage, a $200,000 life insurance payout, plus $110,000 in outstanding medical bills from Carol's treatment, which they said fell to me as her spouse. Do the math, that's $90,000 to start over at 58. Owen had the nerve to say Carol would have wanted things to stay within the family. He said it gently, like he was breaking difficult news with great care. I looked at him for a long moment. I was her family, I said. Neither of them had a response to that. Brendan closed the folder, said they'd give me time to process, and mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that they'd appreciate if everything could be finalized by end of week. Then they left. I sat at that table for a long time after their car pulled out of the driveway. Howard Langley had been my attorney since my contracting days. Sharp, direct, no wasted words. I called him that evening and was in his office the following morning. He listened to everything I laid out, then leaned forward with his elbows on the desk. Lawrence, don't do this. The will has inconsistencies. Carol's mental state during her final weeks, she was on heavy medication. We could contest it. Challenge the timing of the revision, force them to negotiate. I asked how long that would take. Months. Possibly longer if they dig in. I asked what I'd live on in the meantime. The $200,000 minus $110,000 in medical bills left me $90,000. That wasn't going to cover a prolonged legal fight plus living expenses. Howard didn't have a clean answer for that. Here's what I didn't tell him. Something about Brendan and Owen's urgency had been bothering me since the moment they walked in. These were 2 men I'd watched avoid responsibility for nearly 2 decades. Owen once took 6 months to return a contractor's call on a property he was supposedly flipping. Brendan was methodical to the point of paralysis on anything that didn't directly benefit him, but suddenly they needed Carol's estate wrapped up in a week. Men don't rush like that unless they're worried about what you might find if you take your time. I told Howard I was going to give them what they wanted. He stared at me. You'd be signing away any legal right to contest. Once you sign, there's no going back. I understand, I said. He thought I was in shock. Maybe he was right. Or maybe I'd found something 2 nights earlier, sitting in my truck in the driveway at 11 p.m., finally opening the plastic bag the hospital had returned with Carol's personal effects, that had changed the way I was looking at all of it. Her watch, her rings, her wallet, and tucked behind her driver's license, a small brass key worn smooth from handling with a handwritten paper tag attached. 2 things written on it in Carol's handwriting, a number 412, and below that, First Continental Bank, K Street. I hadn't slept since I found it. Nadine, the branch manager at First Continental Bank on K Street, recognized Carol's name without me having to explain much. She led me downstairs to the vault quietly, with the kind of professionalism that understood what kind of morning this was. No small talk. Just a nod and a door held open. Box 412 was larger than I expected. She left me alone in the viewing room. I set the box on the table and sat there for a moment before I opened it. Carol had handled that key so many times the brass was smooth on the edges. She'd been down here, sat in this same chair probably, organized everything the way she organized everything deliberately, in sequence, nothing left to chance. I lifted the lid. The first item was an envelope on top of everything else, my name on the front, in her handwriting. Below it, a note. Read everything else first. I set it aside and picked up the next document. It was a printed email chain. 2 names, Brendan Prescott and Russell Ingram, timestamp 9 months before Carol died. I read it once fast, then again slow. Brendan, the timeline has moved up. If your mother signs the amended LLC transfer before end of Q3, the Pacific West client list transfers to the new entity automatically. She trusts you. Use it. Understood. The husband won't be an issue. He doesn't know how any of this works. I put the paper down, picked it up again, read it a 3rd time. The husband? That's me. I've been building and running commercial projects for 30 years. I've read more contracts than most attorneys. But I don't know how any of this works. I kept going. The next document was a bank statement for an account I'd never heard of. Caldwell Asset Holdings LLC. I had to read the balance line twice. $2,800,000 below the statement. A handwritten note in Carol's hand. This is ours. I moved it here when I realized what they were planning. Only you can access this account. The paperwork is at the bottom of the box. I set that aside and reached for the folder underneath. It was labeled Raines & Associates, Private Investigation, Confidential. Clifford Raines had been thorough. The Brendan section came first. Photographs taken outside a casino in Reno, multiple visits over the past year, some spanning several days. Financial records attached. Brendan owed $150,000 in gambling debts, spread across several creditors, at least 2 of them the kind of people who don't send polite reminder letters. There were also copies of loan documents using Pacific West Realty Advisors' assets as collateral. Carol's signature was on them, except Carol hadn't signed them. The investigator had flagged the signatures as inconsistent with her known handwriting samples. Forgery. Brendan had been borrowing against his mother's business while she was dying in the hospital. Owen's section was just as bad. His real estate investment group in Fresno, the one he was always vague about when we asked, had been running a series of failed investment schemes. $80,000 taken from clients, several of them elderly, funneled into shell accounts that existed on paper and nowhere else. 4 of those clients had filed complaints, none resolved. Both of Carol's sons were drowning, and they'd been planning to use her estate as the life raft. I sat back in that chair and looked at the ceiling for a while. Then I picked up the next document. It was a medical report dated 10 weeks before Carol passed. Not from her regular oncologist, this was from a neurologist I hadn't met. The summary was short. Patient demonstrates no signs of cognitive impairment or diminished capacity. Mental faculties remain intact. Decision-making ability is unaffected by current treatment protocol. Brendan had been quietly suggesting to people, I'd heard it secondhand twice and ignored it both times, that Carol's judgment had been compromised near the end, that the medication had affected her, that maybe she hadn't fully understood what she was signing in those final weeks. This report was Carol's answer to that, before the question was even asked. Underneath the medical report was a copy of a will. Not the one Brendan had laid on my kitchen table. This one was dated 6 weeks before Carol died. I read the distribution section slowly. Everything went to me. The house, the cabin, the business assets, the accounts, all of it to Lawrence Caldwell, with one clause that I read 3 times before I fully understood it. The decision of what, if anything, Brendan Allen Prescott and Owen Dale Prescott shall inherit is left entirely to my husband, Lawrence Caldwell, trusting completely in his judgment to determine what they have truly earned. She left the decision to me, and at the bottom of the page, in Carol's handwriting, original held by Raines and Associates. Not Langley's firm. Howard Langley had been handling Carol's estate planning for years, but at some point, she'd stopped trusting him with this. I didn't know yet whether that was because someone in his office had talked, or whether Brendan had found another way in. What I knew was that the real will existed, it was valid, and Brendan and Owen had been working from a version Carol had superseded 6 weeks before she died. I put everything back in order, took the envelope with my name on it, and placed it in my jacket pocket. I wasn't ready to read it yet, not here. I closed the box, thanked Nadine on the way out, and sat in my truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes without starting the engine. Then I called the number on the business card at the bottom of the box. Clifford Raines picked up on the second ring. He said he'd been expecting my call. I read Carol's letter that night in her office. Our office, technically, she'd always said that, even though I barely used the room. I sat in her chair, at her desk, under the lamp she'd had since before we met, and I opened the envelope. Her handwriting was steadier than I expected for someone who'd written it 2 months before she died. Lawrence, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and the boys have already shown you who they are. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you all of this while I was still there. I needed to be sure of what they were planning before I moved anything. By the time I was sure, I didn't have the energy for the conversation, and I didn't want your last months with me to be about this. You deserved better than that. What they don't know is that I mortgaged both properties. The house has a $900,000 lien against it. The cabin has a $600,000 lien. I took that money out and moved it into Caldwell Holdings, the account that only you can access. The boys think they're inheriting real estate. What they're actually inheriting is $1,500,000 in debt on properties worth $1,200,000. No bank will refinance them. I checked their credit before I did any of this. Brendan's gambling debt disqualifies him. Owen's fraud complaints make it impossible. The life insurance they told you about is real, but the amount is wrong. It's $450,000, not $200,000. There is also a second policy for $250,000 that they don't know exists. Clifford has the documentation for both. I know this seems like a hard way to handle it, but I watched them steal from my clients. I watched Brendan forge my name. I watched Owen take retirement money from people who trusted him, and I watched him not lose a single night of sleep over it. I couldn't let them walk away from that with my house and my business and my client relationships. That wasn't going to happen. You were the best decision I ever made, Lawrence. Don't let them make you feel like a footnote in your own life. Take the money. Start somewhere new. You've earned it 10 times over. All my love. Carol, I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Then I sat there in her chair for a long time without moving. Clifford Raines ran his office out of a plain building in Midtown, worn carpet. Stacked files, a coffee maker that looked older than my truck. He was 63, soft-spoken, the kind of calm you get from doing this kind of work for 30 years. He shook my hand and got straight to it. He confirmed everything I'd found in the box and filled in what I hadn't. The real will was fully executed, properly witnessed, and notarized. The neurologist's report locked down Carol's mental competency at 10 weeks out. The mortgage liens on both properties were recorded and legal. The Caldwell Holdings account was in my name only, no joint access, no way for the estate to claim it. What do you want to do? He asked. I told him I wanted to give Brendan and Owen exactly what they'd asked for. He nodded like that was the answer he'd expected. We spent the next hour going over the gift deed. He would prepare a clean legal transfer of both properties to Brendan Allen Prescott and Owen Dale Prescott, complete with every mortgage, every lien, every dollar of debt attached. When they accepted those properties, they accepted everything that came with them. 30 days to assume the loans or face foreclosure, no exceptions. Before I left, my phone rang, Brendan Lawrence. His voice was warm in the way it only got when he wanted something. Owen and I have been thinking we'd like to sit down with you again before we finalize everything. Go over some of the business documents from Pacific West. Make sure you're not left with anything complicated to sort out. We want to make this easy for you. They wanted to know how much I knew. That's what that call was. That's considerate, I said. Sure, when works for you. We arranged dinner at Owen's house in Granite Bay 2 nights later. I thanked him, hung up, and looked at Clifford. They want to see what I've found, I said. Then let them wonder, he said. Owen's house in Granite Bay was bigger than it should have been for a man with 100 unresolved client complaints. New BMW in the driveway. Furniture that still had the look of things bought to impress rather than to use. Vivian answered the door in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment and greeted me with a warmth that was entirely performance. Brendan was already there, scotch in hand, standing in Owen's study like he owned it, which, given how things were moving, I suppose he thought he soon might. We sat down to dinner. They were good at this, relaxed, attentive, asking about how I was holding up, mentioning Carol warmly like the last 9 months hadn't happened. Owen said she would have been proud of how everyone was handling things. Brendan nodded. I ate and listened and said very little. Then I mentioned, in the middle of a conversation about nothing in particular, that I'd been going through Carol's papers and found a key I didn't recognize. Attached to it was a tag with a number and a bank name I hadn't heard of. The table went quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of people who have nothing to say. The quiet of people choosing very carefully what to say next. Brendan set down his fork. What kind of key? Small brass one, worn down, looked old. I shrugged. Probably nothing, Owen said. You should let us take a look at it. Dad's filing system, Carol's system, could be confusing if you didn't know how she organized things. Sure, I said. I'll bring it by. I had no intention of bringing it anywhere. After dinner, Brendan walked me to my car. He put his hand on the doorframe and said, Lawrence, whatever you find in those papers, bring it to us first. There are people out there who'd take advantage of someone in your position. I looked at him for a moment. I appreciate that, I said. I drove home watching his headlights disappear in the rearview mirror, and I called Clifford to tell him we were ready. The conference room at Howard Langley's office seated 8 people comfortably. That morning it held 6, and it felt like a much smaller space. Brendan and Owen sat on one side of the table. Their attorney, a younger man named Garrett, sharp suit, new briefcase, the slightly overconfident posture of someone who hadn't lost enough cases yet, sat beside them with a folder of paperwork already open. Howard Langley sat at the head of the table, uncomfortable in the particular way of a man who suspects he's about to find out something he'd rather not know. Clifford Raines sat next to me, his briefcase on the floor, both hands flat on the table. Brendan started talking before everyone had settled. He said there had been some confusion about certain documents that had surfaced, that someone appeared to be trying to complicate a straightforward estate process, and that he and Owen wanted to resolve everything quickly and fairly, out of respect for their mother. He said their mother, like the words meant something to him. Clifford let him finish. Then he opened his briefcase and started laying documents on the table, one at a time, without saying anything. He'd done this before. He knew the silence was more effective than commentary. The real will came first. Dated 6 weeks before Carol died, fully executed, 3 witnesses, notarized. Garrett picked it up, read the first page, and his pen stopped moving. Then the neurologist's report. Carol's mental competency confirmed at 10 weeks out from her death. Clifford set it down next to the will without a word. Then the bank records showing Brendan's forged signatures on Pacific West loan documents flagged, annotated, compared side by side with Carol's authenticated handwriting samples. Owen's wire transfer records came next. Then a summary of the 4 client complaints currently sitting unresolved with the California Department of Real Estate. Then the printed emails between Brendan and Russell Ingram. Clifford placed those directly in front of Garrett. Garrett read the first exchange. Then he set the paper down slowly and looked at Brendan. Brendan was staring at the table. Howard Langley cleared his throat. Clifford, I wasn't aware any of this. Carol became aware that information from her estate planning was reaching her sons, Clifford said. She made a decision about who to trust with the final documents. That decision is reflected in the record. Howard didn't respond to that. I slid the gift deed across the table. I'm giving Brendan and Owen what they came here for, the Sacramento house and the Lake Tahoe cabin. Clean transfer, properly recorded, both properties passed to them today if they sign. Owen looked up. Something close to relief crossed his face. Then Garrett put his hand on Owen's arm. Read the attachment, Garrett said quietly. I watched Owen pick up the mortgage summary. I watched his eyes move down the page to the lien amounts. $900,000 against the house, $600,000 against the cabin. Total encumbrance, $1,500,000. Combined property value, $1,200,000. He read the bottom line twice. You're $300,000 underwater before you make a single payment, Clifford said. The liens transfer with the deed. You'd have 30 days to refinance or assume the loans directly. Given your current credit situations, I'd recommend speaking with a lender before you sign, though I'll tell you in advance what they'll say. Brendan's jaw was tight. This is a setup. It's a legal property transfer, Clifford said. Your mother set it up. I documented it. Lawrence is offering it to you voluntarily. You can't. She could. I said she did. 8 months before she died, when she figured out what you were planning. The room was quiet for a moment. You have 2 options, Clifford continued. Accept the properties as offered, or decline, and Mrs. Caldwell's estate passes entirely to Lawrence under the terms of the real will, and we refer the evidence of elder financial abuse, loan fraud, and wire fraud to the district attorney's office. The documentation is complete. The recorded calls are transcribed and time-stamped. We're prepared to move forward either way. Garrett leaned over and said something low to Brendan. Brendan shook his head once. Garrett said it again. This time Brendan didn't respond. Owen signed first. His hand wasn't steady. Brendan took longer. He sat there looking at the signature line for almost 2 minutes. Then he signed, capped the pen, and set it on the table without looking at anyone. As they stood to leave, Brendan stopped at the door. He turned around and looked at me directly for the first time all morning. "She really did all of this," he said. It wasn't a question. Every detail, I said. I just had to wait. He left without another word. I heard through Clifford over the following months what happened next. Brendan filed for bankruptcy inside of 90 days. The Sacramento house went to foreclosure 6 weeks after that when no lender would touch a refinance with his debt and credit profile. The cabin followed shortly after. Vivian filed for divorce from Owen and moved back to her family out of state. Owen took a job managing a storage facility near Fresno. Russell Ingram, the man who'd coached Brendan through the LLC transfer scheme, was the subject of a separate civil complaint filed by 2 of Carol's former clients. That one moved slowly the way those things do, but it moved. I closed on a house in Santa Barbara 3 months after the conference room. Ocean view, garden in the back, a porch wide enough to be worth sitting on. I paid cash and still had more left than I knew what to do with. Between the Caldwell Holdings account, the 2 insurance policies, and the equity Carol had protected, I came out with just over $340 million after the dust settled. I spent the first month doing very little, unpacked slowly, learned which coffee shop opened earliest, figured out the neighborhood. It was the first time in 35 years I didn't have a project deadline or a crew to manage or a contract to review, and it took longer than I expected to stop reaching for work that wasn't there. Some evenings I sit on that porch and think about Carol, about the fact that while I was driving her to appointments and managing medications and trying to hold things together, she was doing all of this, organizing documents, moving accounts, meeting with Clifford, building something that would outlast her. She did it without telling me because she didn't want our last months to be about her sons. She wanted them to be about us. That was Carol, deliberate about everything, nothing left to chance. 6 months after I moved to Santa Barbara, the Carol Caldwell Foundation for Financial Justice opened its doors. We work with people navigating family financial abuse, the kind that happens quietly, inside families, where no one talks about it and the victims usually don't know they have any options. Beverly Rains, Clifford's daughter, runs the day-to-day operations. She's exactly as capable as her father said she was. It's the right use of the money. Carol would have agreed with that immediately. I didn't fight her sons. I didn't have to. She'd already won. She just needed me to be patient long enough to let the plan run. Turns out 19 years of marriage teaches you a few things about trusting someone's judgment, even after they're gone. Carol didn't punish her sons. She just made sure that for once in their lives they couldn't outrun the consequences of who they were, and that the man she loved never had to fight a battle she'd already won for him. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in Lawrence's position, would you have fought back in court? Or would you have waited and let the plan run the way Carol set it up? Comment below, and while you're there, tell me what city you're watching from. I'm always surprised how far these stories travel. Hit subscribe if you want to see more.